Are the young people going to India the way you and I did? Are we exploring the ancient structures? And the lack of a an experience of the wisdom traditions of these great ancient cultures at a time when we so deeply, deeply need it. You know, what with the fact that we're living on screens so much, the young people living on screens rather than in the radical existential experience of these cultures and of what they have to offer. This to me is a tremendous tragedy, perhaps even a fatality of dealing with a time in which more and more history, more and more experience is happening, but it is not necessarily of the wisdom experience. What are your perceptions on that? And yet so many more challenges, more things happening, more challenges than has ever happened in individuals for the first time, I think, in human history to this degree.
Well, I think we would both, and probably all of us, agree that we're in a time of crisis, and it certainly is probably true that we're in a race between consciousness and catastrophe, and we don't know which way it's going to go, but there's nothing to do except work as fully and effectively and devotedly as we can to contributing in whatever ways we can. You mentioned several themes there. One is, are people going to the East as much? Another is the enormous amount of trivia to which we're exposed. And are people are people going to the East as much for wisdom these days? I don't think so, but that's for a couple of reasons. One, the cultures are sloshing into one another, but the other is there have been remarkable changes in the last few decades in our own culture, in as much as there's been an incorporation of Eastern contemplative practices and a revival of the Western contemplative practices. And one really doesn't need to go very far these days to be able to access some profound teachings and teachers. And I just count myself as very fortunate that whereas I once had to trek to Asia, now I can, go locally and find some very fine people who I can learn a lot from. So that's the positive side. The negative side, as you say, is you talked about acceleration, and the overload of trivializing information that we're exposed to. And that is indeed one of the real challenges of our time. And I think one of the questions that all of us who are trying to address these issues is how do we balance our lives in ways which minimize the distraction, minimize the trivia, find a balanced way of relating to media of all kinds, making use of them to serve our well-being and the well-being of everyone, but also practicing a kind of yoga in not letting them take over our lives. And that's I think that's an ongoing challenge for all of us.